A man in a business suit hijacked a passenger jet, collected $200,000, and parachuted into a freezing night. More than 50 years later, the FBI still cannot tell you his name. Almost every crime leaves something behind. A fingerprint on a glass, a body in the ground, a name, a face, a witness, a paper trail that, with enough time and enough people pulling on it, eventually leads somewhere. This one led nowhere. On the night before Thanksgiving, in 1971, a quiet man talked his way onto a passenger plane, threatened it with a bomb, collected a fortune in cash, and walked out the back of the aircraft into the dark sky. He was never seen again. Not his face, not his body, not the money strapped to his chest. He simply stopped existing somewhere over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and he has stayed gone ever since. The world came to know him by a name that was never even his, D.B. Cooper. Over the next 50 years, that name grew into something far stranger than a criminal. It became a legend, an unsolved itch the country could not stop scratching. More than 800 suspects, a 45-year manhunt, books, songs, conventions, and a single bundle of rotting $20 bills dug out of a riverbank by a child. None of it was ever enough to give him a name. It helps to know the moment he stepped into. The early 1970s were the golden age of the airplane hijacking in America. There were dozens of them, year after year, so many that flight crews were quietly trained to go along with it, to keep everyone calm, hand over what was asked, and get the plane safely back on the ground. Most of those hijackers wanted a destination, usually Cuba, and a cause they could shout about. This man wanted none of that. No country, no manifesto, no audience. He wanted cash and a parachute and a way to walk off the edge of the map. That alone set him apart before he had done anything at all. Over the next half hour, we are going to do three things. First, we will walk through exactly what happened that night, minute by minute, because the calm of it is somehow more chilling than any violence would have been. Then we will look at the only solid piece of evidence the case ever produced and what it does and does not prove. And finally, we will sit with the question that has outlived nearly everyone who ever chased it. Who was he, and did he even survive the fall? After half a century, the honest answer is also the most maddening one there is. Nobody knows. He bought his ticket under the name Dan Cooper, a short hop Portland to Seattle, the kind of late afternoon flight nobody's supposed to remember. He paid cash. He carried a briefcase. He took a seat near the back of the Boeing 727, ordered a drink, and waited. By the descriptions that survive, he looked like a middle-aged businessman in a dark suit and a thin tie. Forgettable, almost certainly on purpose. The famous initials came later, and by accident. In the chaos of that first night, a wire service report garbled the details, and the wrong name went out across the country. It stuck. The man on the plane called himself Dan Cooper. The world has called him D.B. Cooper ever since, which means that even his fake name is, in a small way, a mistake nobody ever managed to correct. Not long after takeoff, he handed a note to one of the flight attendants. She was young, working the back of the cabin, and her first instinct was to assume it was a lonely businessman, slipping her his phone number. She tucked the paper into her pocket without reading it. He leaned toward her, calm and quiet, and told her she had better take a look. The note said he had a bomb. He opened the briefcase just enough for her to see inside. A nest of wires, rows of red cylinders that looked exactly like sticks of dynamite. Whether any of it was real, nobody on that airplane could possibly know, and that uncertainty was the whole weapon. A bomb you cannot test is a bomb that works. Then he told her what he wanted, and the precision of the list is the first sign that this was not improvised. $200,000 in $20 bills, and 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes, 2 reserves. Investigators have turned that parachute detail over for 50 years. 4 chutes for 1 man. Why 4? The leading idea is chilling in its cleverness. By asking for 4, he made the authorities believe he might force one of the crew or passengers to jump alongside him. And if an innocent person might be going out that door, the parachutes could not be rigged, could not be sabotaged, could not be packed to fail. He had quietly guaranteed himself working equipment without ever saying so. That is not panic, that is planning. What unsettles everyone who studies that flight, though, is not the threat. It is the manner of the man making it. He was unfailingly polite the entire time. He lit a cigarette. He ordered a bourbon and soda and drank it slowly. While the crew quietly understood that the airplane was now his, the man at the center of it behaved like a passenger mildly inconvenienced by a delayed connection. No shouting, no sweating. Just a calm, courteous stranger who happened to be holding a plane load of people in the palm of his hand. The plane circled near Seattle while the money and the parachutes were gathered on the ground, then landed. There the exchange happened, fast and tense. The cash and the chutes were carried aboard. In return, he kept his word and let the passengers go. About 36 of them filed off the plane, most of them never quite realizing, until they read about it later, how close they had been to the most famous skyjacking in American history. He kept only a small crew. The 2 pilots up front, a flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant. Then the plane was refueled for the next stranger leg. None of this happened in a rush, and the patience of it is part of what unnerves people. While the airline scrambled on the ground to gather $200,000 in 20s and round up 4 parachutes, the plane stayed in the air near Seattle, circling, burning fuel for the better part of 2 hours. 2 full hours of a calm man in a window seat with a lit cigarette, and a cabin of passengers who, for the most part, still had no idea that anything at all was wrong. The flight attendant seated closest to him spent much of that time at his side, carrying his demands to the cockpit and back. By her account, he was not a snarling villain. He was composed, almost courteous, the particular kind of polite that is somehow more frightening than shouting, because it tells you the man has thought all of this through and is in no hurry whatsoever. Picture the ransom itself for a second. $200,000 all in 20s is around 10,000 separate bills, and it weighs something close to 20 pounds. He had it brought aboard in a bag, and by the accounts that survived, he lashed that bag to his body before he jumped. A grown man in a business suit about to step into a freezing storm at 200 miles an hour with a 20-pound brick of cash strapped to his chest. His instructions to the cockpit were unusual enough that the pilots had to push back on some of them. Fly toward Mexico City, stay low under 10,000 feet, keep the speed down, the wing flaps lowered, the landing gear hanging in the wind, and leave the rear staircase, the aft air stair, unlocked. Notice what those demands quietly revealed about him. This was not a man who had wandered onto just any flight with a vague idea and a fake bomb. He had chosen a Boeing 727 on purpose, and he understood its one unusual feature better than most passengers ever would. He knew it could be flown slow and low with the rear stairs down. He knew a person could drop straight out of the back of it into open air and clear the aircraft cleanly. Whoever he was, he knew airplanes, and he had picked the exact machine that turned an impossible escape into a workable plan. You have to understand the machine he had chosen. The Boeing 727 carried a set of stairs built into its tail under the fuselage. On the ground, passengers could walk down them onto the tarmac. In the air with the right plane and the right nerve, they could be lowered straight into open sky. Up in the locked cockpit, the crew watched a small warning light tell them that the back of their own airplane had just opened to the night. What happened next is the entire reason we are still talking about this man. Somewhere over the dark wooded country of southwestern Washington, a little after 8 in the evening, he made his way to the back of the cabin. He went down those open stairs into a roaring wall of freezing air and rain. The plane moving near 200 miles an hour, the cash strapped to his body, and he stepped off. The crew felt him go, a subtle shift in the airplane's balance, a small bump as a weight left the tail. They called to him over the intercom and got nothing back. He was already falling through the night toward a forest he could not see, in conditions that would have frightened a trained paratrooper with a map and a moonlit drop zone. He had neither. Hold on the cold for a moment, because the cold is the heart of the gamble. He went out the back of that jet in a business suit and a thin trench coat, into air far below freezing, into driving rain and darkness, over steep, timbered terrain, at night with no lights below to aim for, and no way to know whether he was about to land in a clearing or in the top of a 100-foot tree. Experienced skydivers turned down jumps in a fraction of those conditions. He chose all of them at once. When the plane finally landed at Reno, federal agents swarmed it. The aft stairs were down. The man was gone. The cabin held only the few things he had left behind. Some cigarette butts. The black clip-on tie he had been wearing dropped near his seat, and almost nothing else. No wallet, no name, no useful fingerprints. A passenger who had sat among them for hours had managed to leave less of himself than a stranger passing through a hotel lobby. On the ground, the response was enormous. Once the plane was down and the man confirmed gone, finding where he had landed became something close to a military operation. Soldiers, federal agents, and local crews worked the rugged country beneath the flight path for weeks, and then for months. Helicopters overhead, lines of men on foot through the timber. They turned up nothing at all. No parachute, no footprint, no scrap of the cash. Part of the problem was the land itself. The country below that flight path is punishing even in daylight. Dense old-growth forest, steep ravines, cold, fast rivers, the kind of terrain that can hide a crashed airplane, let alone a single man. If he came down hurt or came down in the water, there were 100 different ways for the wilderness to take him and never give him back. There was also a darker detail buried in the equipment. One of the parachutes the authorities handed him turned out to be a training rig, sewn shut, useless for a real jump. Nobody knows for certain which chute he strapped on in the dark, or whether the one he chose ever opened. It is entirely possible that the most famous skyjacker in history was dead within minutes of stepping off those stairs, and that the forest simply kept the proof. This is the moment the case becomes the case, because the jump has only two possible endings, and both of them are unbearable in their own way. Either he died that night, he hit the trees at speed in the dark, or the cold finished him, or he came down in a river and was swept away, and his body and his money sank into a wilderness so vast that searchers, even knowing roughly where to look, never turned up a trace. For years, teams combed that ground. They found no parachute, no equipment, no remains. Not a single one of those marked $20 bills. Or he lived. He came down through the storm, gathered up his chute and his cash, walked out of those woods before dawn, and quietly returned to an ordinary life. A neighbor, a co-worker, a man at the end of a bar, carrying the secret of a perfect crime for the rest of his days while the whole country argued about who he might be. "50 years of investigation has never been able to clearly favor one ending over the other. And that gap, that permanent uncertainty, is exactly what turned a hijacker into a folk legend. A criminal we can picture dying alone in the rain or beating the entire system and getting away clean. The country has never been able to choose, so it kept both. The FBI put a codename on the case almost immediately, Norjack, short for Northwest Hijacking. What followed became one of the longest and strangest investigations in the Bureau's history. In the first 5 years alone, agents seriously examined more than 800 suspects. They ran down thousands of tips. They pulled in skydivers and ex-paratroopers, men with grudges and men with records, anyone who fit the loose outline of a calm, middle-aged man who knew his way around a parachute. One by one, the names were checked and crossed off. It is worth remembering exactly when this happened. 1971, there was no DNA testing to fall back on. No security cameras watching the gate, no body scanners, no database of faces, no digital trail of any kind. A passenger could pay in cash, give a false name, sit quietly for a few hours and walk away, having left behind almost nothing but a memory and a discarded tie. The tools that crack a modern case in days simply did not exist yet, and by the time some of them finally arrived, the trail had already gone cold by decades. And the harder they looked, the clearer one cruel fact became. The man had been clever in a very specific, very modern way. He had given them almost nothing to work with. The description was generic, a suit and a tie and dark sunglasses. There was no usable fingerprint. There was no photograph because in 1971, there was no camera pointed at a man in seat 18E. All the FBI ever really had was a composite sketch built from the frightened memories of strangers. And a sketch is not a face. It is a guess that everyone agrees to treat as a face. So the search widened, and into that gap rushed the suspects people still argue about today. Over the decades, a long parade of names has been put forward as the real D.B. Cooper, a skydiver who pulled a strikingly similar hijacking just months later, a former airline employee, an ex-soldier or two, men named by their own relatives, sometimes on a deathbed, men named by amateur investigators working a wall of string and photographs in a spare bedroom, men named by authors with a theory and a book to sell. A few of those names carried real weight behind them. Only months after Cooper, a man named Richard McCoy pulled off a strikingly similar hijacking, demanding cash and parachutes and leaping from the back of a jet in flight. McCoy was caught for his own crime, and for years he sat near the very top of the list of men who might also have been Cooper. The FBI examined him closely and ruled him out, concluding he simply did not match the descriptions from Flight 305. He is this whole case in miniature, a vivid suspect, a satisfying story, and then the evidence quietly refusing to close the gap. Other names were offered up by the people closest to them. A widow who said her husband confessed on his deathbed, a niece who recognized something in an old family photograph, a brother, a friend, a former co-worker, each one certain, each holding a piece that almost fit and never quite did. Whole books and documentaries have been built around a single candidate. Not one of them has ever crossed the line from a confident story into actual proof. Here is the part that matters most, and the part that most retellings quietly skip. The FBI never confirmed a single one of them, not one. Every name you have ever heard attached to this case was put there by someone other than the Bureau itself. Some of those proposed suspects are long dead. The status of others is murkier. And a theory, however confident, however slickly presented on a late-night special, is not a verdict. No court has ever named D.B. Cooper, No agency has ever named D.B. Cooper. After everything, the chair at the center of this story is still empty. Over the years, the hunt curdled into a kind of national hobby, and it never really stopped. Retired engineers, amateur investigators, armchair detectives, and entire conventions of enthusiasts have spent decades picking over every fragment of the case. When investigators lifted microscopic particles off that abandoned clip-on tie, the hobbyists ran with it, arguing that traces of rare metals pointed to a man who had once worked in aerospace or heavy industry. Every few years, a fresh team steps forward to announce it has finally solved the thing. Every few years, closer scrutiny lets the air right back out. The search has now outlasted careers, marriages, and the lifetimes of many of the people who first took it up. The case did leave one permanent mark on the world, though, and you have benefited from it without ever knowing. After Cooper, and after a short rash of copycats who tried the same trick, the government required a simple device on airliners with rear stairways. A small hinged vane mounted by the air stair that the rushing air of flight pushes into place, locking the stairs shut so they cannot be lowered while the plane is moving. They still call it the Cooper vane. It is named for a man whose real name nobody knows, and its only job is to make certain that no one can ever again do exactly what he did. For 9 years, that was the shape of the case. A vivid crime, a vanished man, a mountain of dead-end tips, and not $1 of the ransom ever surfacing in a bank or a shop or a casino, anywhere in the world. The money was as gone as the man who took it. And then, on a riverbank, a little boy reached into the sand. In 1980, a family stopped for a cookout on the bank of the Columbia River at a sandy stretch called Tana Bar. A boy about 8 years old named Brian Ingram was smoothing out a patch of sand to build a fire. Just beneath the surface, his fingers closed on something that was not sand. It was paper. It was money. Decaying, water-rotted $20 bills, still grouped in rubber-banded bundles, about $5,800 in all. The FBI checked the serial numbers against the list they had kept for nearly a decade. They matched. After 9 years of total silence, a piece of D.B. Cooper's ransom had come back into the world, out of a riverbank, in the hands of a child who had not been born when the crime took place. And here is the cruel joke at the center of this case. That discovery, the single hardest piece of physical evidence in 50 years of searching, did not solve anything. If anything, it deepened the mystery. Because no one has ever been able to fully explain how the money got there. The spot was a long way from where investigators believed Cooper had jumped. The bills were buried in a way and worn down in a way that experts have been arguing about ever since. Did the river slowly carry the cash there over the years and bury it in the sand? Did Cooper come down near the water, alive, and stash it himself? Did he die upstream and let the current do the rest? Every answer you reach for creates a brand new problem. The one solid clue the case ever produced points, infuriatingly, in several directions at once. Then there was the tie. That black clip-on, left on the plane, sat in an evidence file for decades. As forensic science advanced, investigators went back to it and lifted microscopic particles from its fibers, and later a partial DNA profile. For a moment, it felt as though modern science might finally finish what 50 years of detective work could not. It didn't. The particles fueled fresh theories about where the man might have worked in industry around certain rare metals. The DNA matched no one anyone could prove. Like the money in the sketch and the whole maddening case, the tie offered just enough to keep hope alive and never enough to close the file. And the money only deepened the puzzle in a second way. The bills at Tana Bar came to about $5,800, That leaves the overwhelming majority of the ransom, well over $190,000, completely unaccounted for. Out of 10,000 Mark 20s, not one other note has ever surfaced. Not in a bank, not in a shop, not in circulation, not in an evidence locker anywhere in the world. If he lived and spent it, he did so without ever once tripping a serial number. If he died, the rest of it rotted into the ground with him. The few bills they did find became their own small battlefield. Some experts argued the river had carried the cash downstream over the years and buried it in the sand long after the jump. Others insisted the way the money was layered and worn pointed to it being placed there on purpose, which would mean someone, possibly Cooper himself, was alive and moving near that riverbank. The single hardest clue in the entire case did not narrow the possibilities. It multiplied them. By 2016, the FBI had carried Norjack for 45 years, and that year, quietly, it made a decision. It suspended the active investigation. Listen to that word, because the Bureau chose it with care. Suspended, not solved. To actually solve a case, the FBI explained, you have to be able to prove who did it beyond a reasonable doubt, and after 4.5 decades, none of the tips, none of the suspects, none of the new technology had ever delivered that proof. So the agents who had given pieces of their careers to this thing set it down at last and turned to cases they could close. The file, 66 volumes thick, was boxed and preserved. The answer to the only question that ever mattered was not inside it. So we are left standing exactly where that flight crew stood, staring at a little warning light that says the back of the airplane is open, and at a space in the cabin where a man used to be. It is worth asking why this one, out of all the crimes that go unsolved, grew into a legend. People did not write songs about him because he hurt someone. He didn't. The uncomfortable truth is that a large part of the country half wanted him to have made it. A polite man in a business suit who outsmarted the airline, the FBI, and the weather itself, took the money and melted into the rain like something out of a tall tale. If he died in those woods, it is a small, lonely tragedy. If he lived, he pulled off the only perfect crime America ever got to watch unfold in real time. And maybe that is the real reason the case refuses to let go of us. We are built to need endings. The confession, the verdict, the body, the name. This story declines to hand us a single one of them. It just leaves the door open, the cold air pouring in, and a question with no floor underneath it. Who was he? There is something almost unbearable about a story that refuses to end. We have built whole institutions on the opposite promise, that the truth comes out, that patience and evidence and science eventually win, that no one simply steps out of a moving airplane and out of history in the same motion. D.B. Cooper looked at all of that and did exactly that, and half a century of effort has never been able to take it back. After 50 years, more than 800 suspects, a boy on a riverbank, in the full weight of the FBI, the most honest sentence anyone can say about D.B. Cooper is also the least satisfying one imaginable. We still do not know, and we may never. So here's where you come in. If you have a theory, I want to hear it. Did he walk out of those woods, or did the forest keep him? Put your verdict in the comments and hit like if you believe a case like this should never have been allowed to go cold. It is the closest thing D.B. Cooper has ever had to a jury. And subscribe, because next time we open another file the world was never able to close.